Well, I'm getting a ton of comments lately, questions saying, David, why aren't you a socialist? Why aren't you a communist? You often mention it, but what about explaining the why? And I've even gotten some suggestions that because I'm not a socialist or a communist, I must be some kind of right winger. I must have had some political 180 where now I am on the political right. But the question is, why do I not subscribe to those ideologies? I think that's a legitimate question that I want to explore. Now, the real reason that I don't support those systems is very simple. I don't believe either system is the best way to maximize human well being and to organize society. And as such, they are not systems that I can support. And I believe this looking at empirical historical data and in applying a socioeconomic analysis to these theories. I am a social democrat. As a reminder, social democrat and democratic socialist are two completely different things. Democratic socialists are socialists, whereas social democrats are not. As a social democrat, I support getting everybody health care, strong unions in support of labor, affordable education that is of high quality, progressive taxation, where the wealthiest are taxed the most, serious corporate regulation, and a very strong social safety net. I support those things. I also support markets, private businesses, private ownership of property, and the ability to make profit in private industry. For a lot of goods and services, there is no good reason to eliminate markets. We don't need government planners deciding, for example, which restaurants should open, which laptops should be manufactured, what kind of furniture should be manufactured and sold. It's completely fine to let companies compete there. Let people start businesses and own them, test ideas, succeed and fail within the context of a market. I do believe that markets encourage innovation, but not because of the reason right-wingers say they do. Right-wingers love to say, if you don't have markets, nobody will ever work hard if they don't have the possibility of becoming a millionaire or a billionaire. I don't buy that stuff from the right. People are also motivated by a lot of other things, curiosity and purpose, recognition, solving problems. And we see publicly funded research produce extraordinary breakthroughs. But it is also true, and we should recognize, that competition and financial rewards are also real motivators. And if you remove them across the entire economy, you reduce experimentation, you reduce innovation, and also, I would argue, efficiency. And so what social democracy recognizes, social democracy being a form of regulated capitalism, social democracy recognizes markets are really useful tools, but markets are not the moral authorities that the right wing believes them to be. I do also believe that some things should be removed from the profit motive because market failure would cause completely unacceptable harm that wealthy countries have no reason to accept. If you don't like the available TVs, you can wait to buy one. If you don't like the prices, you can wait for a sale or not buy one at all and hope that the market adjusts. That's TVs. If you need insulin, you can't wait for the market to become more compassionate or adjust so that you can afford your insulin. And so in the areas of healthcare, education, infrastructure, law enforcement, military, and other essential services, we can't treat them like sneakers. We can't treat them like video games. Their purpose must be universal access, not let's extract the maximum possible profit from people who end up with nowhere else to go. That's the basic social democratic approach. You use markets where they improve people's lives, and you use public provision where markets predictably fail. So then why am I not a socialist or a communist? Why won't I go further? Let's deal with each of them sort of one by one. Now, I don't want to make this a definitional game where people, it's sort of like when you criticize Jordan Peterson and the Peterson people go, you're not criticizing exactly what he meant. Even if we have to have some kind of working definitions for socialism and communism. Socialism and communism in turn usually want to replace private ownership of major industries with worker, public, or state ownership, depending on whether we're talking about a socialist or a communist model. Now, of course, there are many different kinds of socialism. Democratic socialists are not communists, but I just don't see broad collective ownership as the best way to organize an economy. This is a question to a degree of opinion. Some in the audience might disagree. You might go, no, that is the best way to organize the economy. All right, well, we're having the conversation. I do support voluntary worker cooperatives. Let people create them and finance them and demonstrate their advantages if that's what they want to do. Nobody should be prevented from running a business as a co-op, but nobody should be required to run a business as a co-op either. Requiring businesses to adopt collective ownership limits choices. It's authoritarian. It eliminates potentially useful forms of competition. And I am an anti-authoritarian at my core. This is why I'm opposed to both right-wing and left-wing authoritarianism, whether it's Kim Jong-un or Putin or Maduro or whatever. I'm an anti-authoritarian. Now, if a privately owned restaurant and a worker-owned factory and a publicly owned utility each work well in their respective areas, I see no reason to force them into the same ownership model. Now, communism goes further. Communism usually wants state or government ownership of the businesses, the elimination of economic classes, and theoretically, depending on which flavor you're sort of talking about, an eventual stateless society. I just don't believe that eliminating private ownership and market forces throughout the economy would maximize well-being. And we've got a lot of examples from history of where it has destroyed well-being. It would create massive information problems. It weakens useful incentives, and it'll end up concentrating economic decisions in institutions that are often completely incapable of understanding local needs and individual preferences. And that's where we come back to the sort of fundamental authoritarianism of it. What happens under socialism when owners refuse to surrender their businesses to that socialized ownership model? And when people move their money, when voters elect leaders promising to restore private enterprise in a socialist system, if socialism can freely be voted out, I don't think it would last. And if you preserve socialism against public resistance, you can end up with property seizures, capital controls, restrictions on investment, limits on political opposition. It is a very serious authoritarian danger. And that exists both in forcing a society into one of these models and in getting it to remain there. Communism just intensifies that. And reaching the supposed stateless society requires an extraordinarily powerful state, which sometimes seizes property, eliminates the capitalist class, reorganizes production, and usually suppresses resistance to that change as well. And the state doesn't disappear. What we've seen historically is that you end up with this new ruling class made up of often corrupt, typically cronyistic and nepotistic party officials, bureaucrats, military leaders, security agencies. Now, I know that some people will go, but David, those weren't real communism. I think that avoids sort of the central question, which is why have attempts to implement communism so consistently produced this one-party rule filled with censorship and repression? So for me, one of the key tenets of leftism is opposing domination. That includes domination by corporations and billionaires on the one hand, and it also includes opposing domination by governments or political parties or these self-appointed revolutionaries who say, I speak for everybody. Social democracy, which I subscribe to, recognizes corporate power can become abusive and state power can become abusive, and both need democratic limits. So I want markets where markets work. I want public provision where markets fail or distort society. And I want democracy to protect people from both corporate and government power. Not being a socialist, not being a communist doesn't make one right wing. My goal is not to reach the furthest left position imaginable. My goal is let's support the system most likely to improve people's lives while preserving freedom. And that is why I have the beliefs I have of social democracy. Many examples around the world of social democracy successes. And that is how I have come to hold the beliefs that I hold. People can disagree. People can email me. People can leave a comment, info@davidpakman.com. But hopefully I've at least explained the origins or justification for my position. Thanks for watching. Check out this other video. And if you like our content, make sure to subscribe so YouTube puts our videos in your feed, and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and Apple.